My name is Isadora Valois, and I am a sommelier. For most of my 32 years, my life has been defined by the subtle language of wine, the whisper of terroir in a glass of Sancerre, the bold declaration of oak in a Napa Cabernet. But I never imagined that my entire future, my very birthright, would come down to a single bottle. My brother Cashin laughed when I brought just one case of wine to the valuation that would decide the fate of our family's legacy, our grandfather's vineyard. He sneered at my 12 simple bottles while he stood proudly beside literal pallets of his own mass-produced product. He thought he had already won. He thought the game was about volume and profit margins. He didn't know that our grandfather, in his infinite and subtle wisdom, had mailed one final life-altering letter a year before he passed. Before I dive into the story of how a forgotten patch of earth and a contest designed to break me ended up becoming my greatest victory, I'd love to know where all of you are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the very people who were supposed to believe in you the most, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And of course, if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. It all started on the day the will was read, a day that felt less like a solemn remembrance and more like the starting pistol for a war I never wanted to fight. The air in Mr. Abernathy's office was thick with the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and the cloying, expensive perfume my mother, Genevieve, favored. It was a scent I associated with strained family dinners and unspoken disappointments. I sat stiffly in a leather chair that sighed every time I shifted, my hands clenched in the lap of my simple black dress. Across from me, my brother Cashin lounged in his chair as if it were a throne he had already inherited. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my car, a smug, predatory stillness in his posture. He was the future, the CEO in waiting. I was the sentimental relic, the sommelier who played with dirt and memories. Our parents sat on a separate couch, a united front of tailored grief and quiet expectation. My father, Robert, looked at Cashin with undisguised pride, while my mother's gaze kept flicking towards me with a familiar weary anxiety, as if my very presence was a problem she needed to solve. Mr. Abernathy, a man whose kindness was as much a fixture of my childhood as the scent of my grandfather's pipe tobacco, cleared his throat. He looked older today, the weight of his duty pressing down on his stooped shoulders. He had been Nono's lawyer, his friend, his chess partner. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read from the thick document in a low, steady voice. The bequests were standard at first. Portfolio of stocks for my parents, a collection of art for a distant cousin, a generous donation to the local library. I felt my own breath catch in my throat, waiting for the one thing that mattered, the only thing I had ever truly loved with a passion that bordered on sacred. The vineyard. Solace, our family's estate, was more than land and vines. It was a living library of my grandfather's life, of our family's history, written in rows of gnarled wood and deep roots. And now, Mr. Abernathy said, pausing to look over his glasses at Cashin, then at me, we come to the matter of the Solace vineyard and the adjoining estate. Cashin straightened slightly, a flicker of raw ambition in his eyes. He ran a hand over his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of preemptive victory. To my grandchildren Isadora and Cashin, I leave a challenge, for it is in challenge that character is forged and true passion is revealed. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Nono loved games and riddles, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. Mr. Abernathy continued reading the clause, his voice resonating with my grandfather's almost theatrical gravity. The Solace vineyard in its entirety shall be bequeathed to whichever of my two grandchildren, Isadora or Cashin, produces the most profitable vintage in the span of 1 year from the date of this reading. The vineyard shall be divided equally for this purpose. They may use any and all resources of the estate, but the final valuation will be based solely on the demonstrated profitability of the wine they create. The final valuation will occur 1 year from today, in the grand tasting room, to be overseen by my executor. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Cashin's face. He shot me a look of pity so profound it was almost comical. Profitability. Not quality. Not artistry. Not heritage. Profitability. It was a contest designed for him to win and for me to lose. He was a businessman. His entire world revolved around spreadsheets, margins, and market scaling. I was a sommelier. My world was about terroir, patience, and the story in the bottle. My grandfather might as well have asked a poet and an auctioneer to see who could write the more valuable novel. "Well, that's that then," Cashin said, his voice smooth and dismissive. He stood up, already the proprietor. "No offense, Izzy, but we both know how this is going to end. Why don't you save yourself the trouble? I'll give you a generous buyout. You can open a little wine bar somewhere, play with your fancy bottles. Leave the real business to me." His words were a casual, brutal dismissal of my life's work, of the passion Nono and I had shared. "I'll be competing," I said, my voice quiet but firm, surprising even myself. My father sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Isadora, don't be difficult. Cashin is making a very reasonable offer. This is a commercial enterprise, not a hobby. What do you know about running a business of this scale?" Each word was a small, sharp cut. I knew about the soil composition in the western plot. I knew the exact angle of the sun needed to prevent mildew on the Riesling grapes. I knew the sound the fermentation tanks made when the yeast was happy. I knew the soul of the place. But I didn't know profit and loss statements, and in their eyes, that meant I knew nothing at all. "I'll be competing," I repeated, looking directly at Cashin, whose amusement was now tinged with annoyance. He wanted a clean, swift victory, not a messy, sentimental fight. After the others had filed out, leaving a wake of tense silence, Mr. Abernathy called me back. He handed me a small, cream-colored envelope, sealed with my grandfather's wax signet, a single grape leaf. "Your grandfather left this for you specifically, Isadora," he said gently. His instructions were clear. You are to open it only when you feel you have created something truly worthy of his name. Not before. I took the envelope, its weight feeling both heavy and hopeful in my hand. It was a message from the past, a final piece of my grandfather. I clutched it like a talisman as I walked out of the office and into the daunting reality of the year ahead. The battle for solace had begun. The next morning, I walked the line that now divided the vineyard. It was an invisible scar on the land I loved, but it was as real as a fortress wall. On Cashin's side, the transformation was already underway. A team of consultants in crisp polo shirts walked the rows with clipboards. Tractors with unfamiliar attachments were already churning the earth between the vines. He was moving with the brutal efficiency of a corporate takeover. He wasn't tending a vineyard. He was liquidating an asset. My side was quiet. The vines stood in the morning mist, silent and waiting. It was overwhelming. Half the vineyard was still hundreds of acres. The task of producing a profitable vintage from this seemed impossible. I was one person against a machine. Doubt, cold and creeping, began to seep into my resolve. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was a fool's errand. My parents found me there, standing at the edge of my allotted territory. My mother had that pained look on her face again. "Darling," she began, her voice laced with a gentle condescension she probably thought was soothing. "We're worried about you. It's too much for you. Cashin has a plan, a team. It's a guaranteed success. There's no shame in admitting that. The only shame would be in not trying," I countered, my gaze fixed on the familiar slope of the South Hill. "Don't be so dramatic, Isadora," my father cut in, his patience already gone. "This isn't one of your wine tastings with flowery language about sunlight and memories. This is about money. Hard numbers. He will produce 10,000 cases of perfectly acceptable, marketable wine. What can you possibly do to compete with that? Make one perfect barrel. The will is about profitability. It's simple math." His words stung precisely because they were so logical. The terms of the will were Cashin's native language. How could I possibly win a game whose rules were written to celebrate everything he was and disregard everything I was? They left me there, their disappointment hanging in the air. Their lack of faith was a heavier burden than the work ahead. It was in that moment of despair, standing on the land I was supposedly fighting for, that I truly felt alone. That evening, I retreated to my grandfather's study, a sanctuary of leather-bound books and lingering pipe smoke. I needed to feel close to him, to find some spark of his defiant spirit. I ran my fingers over the spines of his old viticulture texts, searching for an answer I didn't know how to ask for. My hand stopped on a large, beautifully illustrated atlas of the region from the turn of the century. I opened it, and tucked inside was a hand-drawn map of the Solis estate. It was Nano's own work, full of notes and annotations in his elegant, spidery script. Most of it was familiar, but in the far northeastern corner, a section I barely knew, he had drawn a small rectangle and shaded it in. Beside it he had written, Le cœur de la terre, the heart of the earth. On the current maps of the vineyard, this area was marked as uncultivated woodland, too rocky and steep to be of any use. But on Nano's old map, it was clearly marked with the symbol for vines. The next day, armed with a pair of rusty shears and a sense of desperate hope, I made my way to that forgotten corner of the property. It was even more overgrown than I'd imagined. A crumbling stone wall, choked with ivy, encircled a small plot of land, no more than 2 acres. It was a wild, tangled mess of thorns and weeds. Took me hours of hacking and clearing to even get inside. But when I finally broke through, I stopped, and my breath caught in my chest. There they were. Gnarled, thick, ancient vines, twisted into shapes that spoke of a century of survival. They were not trained on modern trellises but grew low to the ground, wild and untamed. They were a varietal I barely recognized, something ancient, pre-phylloxera, a living fossil from a time before winemaking became an industry. They were all but forgotten, written off as unproductive and difficult. But Nano had known they were here. He had named the plot. This wasn't an oversight. It was a secret. A surge of adrenaline, of purpose, shot through me. This was it. This was my answer. I couldn't compete with Cashin on volume. I couldn't make 10,000 cases of mediocre wine. But maybe, just maybe, I could make one case of something extraordinary. Something that had a story. Something with a soul. But I couldn't do it alone. The knowledge required to resurrect these vines was beyond me. I thought of Matteo, my grandfather's old vineyard manager, who had retired a few years ago. He was a man who spoke the language of the earth, whose hands held a lifetime of knowledge. I found him in his small cottage at the edge of town, tending a garden of impossibly vibrant tomatoes. He was old, his back stooped, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as ever. I told him about the contest, about the forgotten plot, the ancient vines. He listened patiently, wiping his hands on a rag. When I was done, he just grunted. "Your grandfather was a romantic fool," he said, but there was no malice in his voice. "And you are his granddaughter. Those vines. They are stubborn. They are mean. They give very little, and they demand everything. But what they give, is it special?" asked my heart pounding. Matteo looked away, towards the hills in the distance, a long, deep look into the past. "Special," he finally said, a slow smile cracking his weathered face. "Your grandfather believed they were magic. He called them the heart of the earth for a reason, Isadora. They taste of the stones, the sun, the struggle. They taste of truth." He looked back at me, his eyes studying my face. "This will be hard work. Harder than you can imagine. You will have nothing but blisters and backaches to show for it for a long time." "I'm not afraid of work, Matteo," I said. "I'm afraid of failing him." He nodded slowly. "Good. That is the right thing to be afraid of. Be at the plot tomorrow at sunrise. And bring better gloves." The next morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky, I was there. So was Matteo. And as we began the painstaking work of clearing the thorns and weeds from around the base of the first ancient vine, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't just a competition anymore. It was a restoration. It didn't take long for Cashin to notice my new project. He drove up one afternoon in his pristine SUV, the dust settling on his expensive Italian shoes as he stepped out. He surveyed the mess of cleared brush and the gnarled skeletal vines with an expression of utter disbelief. "What in the world is this, Izzy?" he asked, a laugh already bubbling in his voice. "Are you starting a haunted forest? I heard you were clearing this patch. I assumed it was for a bonfire." "These are the oldest vines on the property," I said, trying to keep my voice even, refusing to let him see how much his mockery stung. "They're old because they're useless," he scoffed. "There's a reason Nano never cultivated this land. It's worthless. The yield will be pathetic. You'll be lucky to get a barrel out of this whole mess." "Barrel, Izzy. I just signed a distribution deal for 5,000 cases for my Chardonnay alone. The purchase orders are already rolling in." He shook his head, a pantomime of pity. "You're so sentimental. You're just like him. You'd rather play in the dirt and tell stories than run a successful business. Well, enjoy your mud pies. I have a meeting with a label designer." He got back in his car and drove off, leaving me covered in dirt and stung by his casual cruelty. Matteo, who had been silently working nearby, came over. "Do not listen to him," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The loudest wagons are often the most empty. He sees wood and leaves. He does not see the heart." But Cashin's tactics weren't limited to verbal barbs. A few weeks later, we discovered that the water flow to the small irrigation pipe that fed the hill near my plot had been drastically reduced. It was an old system, and Cashin's new industrial-scale irrigation network had simply commandeered the main line. When I confronted him, he feigned ignorance. "Oh, that. Sorry, Izzy. Progress, you know. My new system is much more efficient. I can't be responsible for every old leaky pipe on the property. You should probably upgrade." Upgrading would have cost a fortune I didn't have. Instead, Matteo and I spent a week hauling water in tanks on the back of his old pickup truck, a back-breaking Sisyphean task. It was a war of attrition, and Cashin was determined to wear me down. But with every bucket of water I carried, with every thorn I cleared, my resolve hardened. He thought he was fighting me for a vineyard. I knew I was fighting for something more. The year that followed was a blur of relentless, unforgiving labor. It was a single-minded devotion to that 2-acre plot of land. My life, which had been a symphony of different wines, regions, and stories, was now focused on a single demanding note. The world shrank to the size of that stone-walled enclosure. My hands, once soft and skilled at decanting fragile old vintages, became calloused and strong. I learned the unique language of each of the 57 ancient vines. I knew the one near the western wall that caught the morning sun first, the one whose leaves were always the last to turn in the autumn, the one that drooped dramatically if it went a single day without enough water. Matteo was my silent, steadfast guide. He taught me things no sommelier school could ever teach. He taught me how to read the clouds, how to smell rain on the wind, how to listen for the subtle signs of pests not with chemicals, but with patience. When a dusting of powdery mildew appeared on the leaves one humid week, my heart sank. Could ruin the entire tiny crop. Cashin's solution would have been a broad-spectrum fungicide, sprayed from a tractor. Matteo had me spend 3 days hand-wiping each affected leaf with a simple solution of milk and water. It was painstaking, tedious work. Cashin drove by once and laughed from his truck window. "Playing doctor with the leaves, Izzy? Just spray the damn things and be done with it." But I trusted Matteo. I trusted the old ways. And a week later the mildew was gone. The leaves were green and healthy. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was proof that patience could be more powerful than brute force. We pruned by the cycles of the moon, a practice my enology professors would have scoffed at, but one Matteo swore by. "The vine is a living thing, Isadora," he would say. "It feels the pull of the earth, the sky. You have to work with its rhythms, not against them." As the seasons turned, the vines responded. Tiny, hard green buds appeared, then small, fragrant flowers. And then the grapes. They were small, intensely dark, and grew in sparse, tight clusters. The yield was, as Cashin had predicted, pathetic. But the grapes themselves were anything but. They had a weight, a concentration that felt profound. In the midst of this intense focus, I often felt a deep, gnawing self-doubt. The scale of Cashin's operation was a constant, looming shadow. I would see the convoys of trucks arriving with bottles, labels, and corks. I would hear the hum of his state-of-the-art bottling line running late into the night. He was manufacturing a product. I was coaxing a story out of the earth. The chasm between our approaches seemed impossibly wide. One evening, sitting on my porch, exhausted and sore, the weight of it all pressed down on me. Was this just a fantasy? A tribute to a dead man's romantic notion? Was I sacrificing my future for a handful of grapes that might not even make good wine? My hand went to the drawer where I kept the sealed envelope from Nano. Open it only when you feel you have created something truly worthy of his name. I hadn't created anything yet, just a few bunches of unharvested fruit. But I was closer to understanding him than I had ever been. My fingers broke the wax seal. The letter inside was written in his familiar, looping hand. It wasn't a clue or a secret strategy. It was a confession. My dearest Isadora. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means you have followed your heart, not the chorus of doubt. I know the terms of my will seem cruel. I know they seem to favor your brother's worldview. They were designed to. I did not set this challenge to see which of you was the better businessperson. I set it to see if you would have the courage to be yourself in a world that rewards conformity. Cashin has his path. He is good at what he does and he will be successful. But his path is wide and paved. Yours, my dear, was always meant to be the hidden trail through the woods. Asterisk. Asterisk those vines in the Coeur de la Terre. They are our family's beginning. They are the reason we are here. They are difficult and stubborn, and they refuse to be tamed. Just like the best of us. They do not offer easy rewards. They demand faith. Asterisk. Asterisk, I did not set you up to fight your brother, Isadora. I set you up to find yourself. To discover that your quiet passion is not a weakness, but an immense strength. The vineyard was never the prize. Your belief in your own worth is. Whatever happens at the end of this year, know that by simply choosing this difficult path, by honoring the heart of the earth, you have already made me prouder than you can ever imagine. Asterisk. Your loving Nano. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the ink. The weight on my shoulders didn't disappear, but it shifted. It was no longer the weight of a competition, but the weight of a legacy. My motivation was purified. It wasn't about beating Cashin anymore. It wasn't even about the vineyard. It was about proving my grandfather right. It was about becoming the person he already believed I was. The harvest was a sacred, quiet affair. Just me and Matteo under a golden autumn sky. We didn't use machines, only our hands, carefully snipping each precious cluster and laying it gently into a shallow basket. The total yield was laughably small. It filled less than a dozen baskets. It was everything I had. We pressed the grapes in an old hand-cranked wooden press that had been gathering dust in the back of the cellar. The juice that ran out was the color of liquid amethyst, dark and impossibly fragrant. It smelled of blackberries, of damp earth, of violets and something else, something wild and ancient that I had no name for. We transferred the juice to a single small French oak barrel, the best one I could find. And then we waited. As my single barrel sat in the quiet dark of the cellar, aging, Cashin's victory tour was in full swing. He had bottled and shipped tens of thousands of cases of his Valois Vintners Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon. They were, by all accounts, perfectly adequate wines. Clean, fruity, technically sound, and utterly forgettable. They were wines made by a committee and a focus group. They had a price point, a target demographic, but no soul. But they were profitable. Incredibly profitable. To celebrate his imminent victory, Cashin threw a lavish party for his distributors and local business leaders at the main house. He invited me, of course. It was a command performance, a chance for him to display his magnanimity in the face of my inevitable, humiliating defeat. I almost didn't go, but something Nano's letter had sparked in me. a quiet, unshakable core of self-worth, made me put on a simple dress and walk into the lion's den. The party was loud and ostentatious. Cashin was in his element, holding court, his voice booming over the chatter. He had set up a tasting bar with his 2 wines, and people were dutifully sipping and nodding. He saw me come in and made his way over, a glass of his Chardonnay in his hand. "Izzy, glad you could make it," he said, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. "Enjoying the party? This is what success looks like. Get a good look, because it's the last time you'll be here as anything but a guest. You should try my Chardonnay. It's polling exceptionally well with millennial women. We're projecting another 50,000 cases next year." I looked at the pale, generic wine in his glass. I thought of the deep, mysterious purple of my own creation, sleeping in its barrel. I gave him a small, serene smile. "It looks like you've been very busy, Cashin." My calmness seemed to unnerve him. He had expected me to be sullen or angry or defeated. He didn't know what to do with my peace. "Busy making a fortune," he clarified, his tone hardening. "While you've been off making your... what is it? A dozen bottles of nostalgia juice. The valuation is in 2 weeks. I hope you're prepared for the inevitable." "I'm more prepared than you think," I said, my voice still quiet. I didn't need to raise it. For the first time in my life, I felt no need to fight for his approval or fear his disapproval. I was on my own path. "The year isn't over, Cashin." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with a look of confused irritation on his face. He had built an army to fight a war, but he was slowly realizing I wasn't even on his battlefield. I was somewhere else entirely, playing a different game, a game whose rules he would never understand. The day of the valuation arrived cloaked in a cold, gray drizzle. It felt appropriate, like the sky was holding its breath. The grand tasting room, a place of happy memories with my grandfather, had been transformed into a corporate boardroom. A long, polished table dominated the space. At one end sat Mr. Abernathy, his face impassive, and a prim, severe-looking accountant named Ms. Albright, who had a calculator and a stack of papers in front of her. My parents were there, seated off to the side, my mother twisting her pearls, my father looking sternly proud of his son. And then there was Cashin's display. It was a monument to commerce. He had stacked dozens of cases of his wine against one wall, creating a veritable fortress of product. Beside it, on an easel, was a massive whiteboard covered in charts, graphs, and staggering numbers. Sales figures, profit and loss statements, distribution contracts, projected earnings. It was an overwhelming, undeniable testament to his success. He stood beside it like a general revealing his battle plan, radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable triumph. He went first. His presentation was slick, polished, and utterly devoid of emotion. He spoke of market penetration, of cost per unit, of leveraging the Valois name into a brand optimized for the mid-range consumer. "As you can see," he concluded, gesturing to the final number on the whiteboard, a figure well into the 7 digits, circled in red. "The profitability of my vintage is not a matter of opinion. It is a mathematical fact. I have created a sustainable, scalable, and highly profitable business model for the future of this vineyard." He paused, letting the weight of the numbers sink in. "The numbers speak for themselves. The most profitable vintage. The vineyard is mine." He sat down, giving me a final pitying smirk. My father clapped him on the shoulder. My mother gave a weak, relieved smile. "It was over. Isadora," Mr. Abernathy said gently. "Do you have anything to present?" All eyes turned to me. I felt small and foolish in that moment, a child who had brought a dandelion to a flower show. I walked to the front of the room. I had no whiteboard, no charts. I carried a single, beautifully crafted wooden case. I set it down on the table with a soft, final thud. Inside, nestled in silk lining, were 12 bottles of my wine. The bottles were simple, the labels handwritten by me. Cœur de la Terre. Cashin let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It wasn't just mocking, It was genuinely baffled. "That's it," he choked out, looking around the room for support. 12 bottles. 12 bottles of wine. Are you serious? He turned to Ms. Albright. "What's the market value on that? Let's be generous. Say $200 a bottle. That's $2,400. My labeling costs were more than your entire vintage's value." He shook his head, the smirk returning wider and more vicious this time. "It's pathetic, Isadora. Truly. You've not only lost, you've embarrassed the family name with this hobby project." My mother's face was a mask of sheer mortification. My father wouldn't even look at me. I could feel the humiliation coiling in the air, thick and suffocating. Ms. Albright cleared her throat, picking up her pen. "Based on the documentation provided by Mr. Cashin Valois, and the absence of competing financial data from Miss Valois, the declaration is straightforward." She was cut off by the sound of the heavy oak doors to the tasting room swinging open. A man stood in the doorway, framed by the gray light from outside. He was older, in his 70s, with a shock of white hair, piercing blue eyes, and an air of authority so profound it seemed to suck the very air out of the room. He was dressed impeccably in a tweed jacket, but he looked as if he was more at home in a dusty cellar than a boardroom. I knew that face. I would have known it anywhere. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was Antoine Dubois. Antoine Dubois, the world's most renowned, most feared, most respected wine critic. It was like seeing a god of my own religion walk into the room. The room was stunned into absolute silence. Cashin stared, his mouth slightly agape. My parents looked utterly bewildered. It was Mr. Abernathy who broke the spell. He stood up, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face for the first time that day. "Ah, Mr. Dubois. We were expecting you. Thank you for coming." He held up a thin, sealed document. There was one final addendum to my client's will. A clause to be enacted only on the day of this valuation. He broke the seal. It stated that in a matter of such importance, a final arbiter of value was required. An expert whose opinion is beyond reproach. He looked around the room. "My office sent a letter 1 year ago, per Mr. Alastair Valois' posthumous instructions, to Mr. Dubois, inviting him here today to serve as that final arbiter." Cashin's face went from smug to confused to pale with dawning horror. He looked from Dubois to the lawyer and then to me, as if I had orchestrated some elaborate trick. Antoine Dubois walked into the room, his presence changing its entire dynamic. He completely ignored Cashin's mountain of wine and his whiteboard of numbers. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the room and settled on the single wooden case on the table. He walked towards it not with the stride of a critic, but with the reverence of a pilgrim approaching a shrine. "Mademoiselle Valois?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly baritone with a thick French accent. His gaze was fixed on the case. "Yes," I managed to whisper, my throat dry. "Your grandfather wrote to me," he said softly, for my ears only. He told me a story about a stubborn old man and his stubborn old vines. He said his granddaughter had the same fire. He said you might make something true. He looked up at me. "Did you?" I could only nod. He opened the case himself, with the careful hands of a surgeon. He lifted one of the bottles, his thumb stroking the simple, handwritten label. "Coeur de la Terre," he read aloud. He looked at me again. "May I?" I nodded once more, my voice gone. He proceeded with a ritual I had only ever read about. He selected a single glass. He opened the bottle not with a corkscrew, but with heated tongs, a dramatic old-world method used for ancient, fragile corks. The crack of the glass was the only sound in the dead-silent room. He poured a small amount of the wine into the glass. The color was stunning, a deep, vibrant garnet that seemed to glow from within. He swirled it, holding it up to the light. He buried his nose in the glass, and his eyes closed. A full minute passed. No one moved. No one breathed. Then he took a small, slow sip. He didn't swallow. He held the wine in his mouth, his expression unreadable, thoughtful. Finally he swallowed, and a look of profound, unadulterated awe dawned on his face. He looked up, not at me but at the room, at the universe. "Profitability," he said, the word sounding like a profanity on his tongue. "You speak of profitability." He gestured dismissively toward Cashin's display without even looking at it. "That is commerce. This," he said, holding up the glass of my wine like it was the Holy Grail, "this is art. This is legacy." He turned to the stunned Ms. Albright. "Some things cannot be measured on a calculator. This is a wine from a lost generation. A pre-phylloxera varietal, expressing itself with a purity I have not tasted in 30 years of searching. It tastes of history itself. It is a ghost. A beautiful, perfect ghost." He placed the glass down gently. To assign a simple price to this bottle would be an insult to the grape, to the ground it came from, and to the memory of the man who preserved it. He looked directly at Cashin, his eyes cold and sharp as chips of ice. "But since we are forced to speak in your language of numbers for the purpose of this contest," he said the word with infinite disdain, "let me be clear. There is no winery in the world that would not kill for this. There is no collector who would not empty his vault. If a single bottle of this wine were to go to auction at Sotheby's or Christie's, the bidding would start at a figure that would make your entire year's profit look like a rounding error. As for the case, as for the 56 other vines that might produce this again, the value is, for all intents and purposes, incalculable." He turned his gaze back to me, and it was filled with a warmth and respect that felt like the sun coming out after a long winter. "Mademoiselle Valois," he declared to the silent, frozen room. "By any measure that truly matters, be it legacy, rarity, artistry, or even, if you must, sheer monetary potential, you and you alone are the winner. The vineyard is yours." The silence that followed his declaration was a living thing. It was thick with shattered pride and dawning realization. Cashin's face was a mess of emotions, a rapid, flickering film of disbelief, fury, and utter humiliation. He was a man who had been playing chess with utter confidence, only to have the board flipped over and be told he was playing the wrong game all along. "No," he finally stammered, his voice cracking. "No, that's absurd. It's subjective. It's one man's opinion." He pointed a shaking finger at Du Bois. "Who is he to decide? This is a trick. You paid him. You cheated." His voice rose, becoming shrill. He turned on me, his eyes wild with a rage born of a lifetime of effortless superiority being suddenly and publicly annihilated. You did this. You planned this. You were always trying to undermine me, playing the poor little victim." My father rushed to his side, putting a hand on his arm. "Cashin, son, calm down." But Cashin shook him off, his perfectly constructed world crumbling around him. My mother just sat there, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a shock that seemed to hold no room for either joy for me or sorrow for him. She was simply paralyzed. Ms. Albright was slowly, methodically putting her pens away, her face a carefully neutral mask, but her movements had the finality of a gavel striking wood. I didn't stay to watch the rest of the implosion. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the noise and the anger behind me. I didn't feel triumphant or vengeful. I just felt quiet. I walked out of the house into the soft gray drizzle, and didn't stop until I reached the Cour de la Terre. The ancient vines stood silently in the mist, their work done. Matteo was there, waiting for me, an umbrella in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. He had known. Of course he had known. Without a word, he took the bottle I was still carrying and opened it. He poured a small amount into each of our glasses. We stood there, in the heart of the earth, surrounded by the gnarled vines, and we drank. The wine was even better here. It tasted of the rain, of the stones beneath my feet, of a year of back-breaking work and a lifetime of love. It tasted of victory. "You're no, Matteo said, his voice thick with emotion. He was a stubborn fool. But he was a very, very wise man. He knew the difference between price and value. He raised his glass to me, to the heart of the earth, and to its keeper. Later that evening, long after Du Bois had departed and Cashin had stormed off, my parents found me in my grandfather's study. They hovered in the doorway, hesitant and awkward, as if entering a foreign country. "Isadora," my mother began, her voice strained. We wanted to congratulate you. It was quite a surprise. We just didn't understand," my father added, his usual bluster gone, replaced by a confused humility. "We thought Cashin's way, the business way, was the only practical path. The numbers." I looked at them, not with anger, but with a new, sad clarity. I had spent my whole life craving their validation, their belief in me. And now that I had it, I realized I no longer needed it. "You saw what you wanted to see," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You always have. You saw a businessman and a dreamer. You never thought the dreamer might have a better plan." There was a long silence. They had no response. The apology they were trying to offer was for being wrong about the outcome, not for their lack of faith in me. And I knew in that moment that our relationship would never be the same. It couldn't be. I had outgrown the space they had always kept me in. Cashin left the next day. He didn't say goodbye to our parents. He came to find me in the cellar, where I was checking on the single barrel that now felt like the most precious object in the world. He was carrying a duffel bag, his face pale and set. "You can have it," he said, his voice flat and bitter. "You can have this dusty, sentimental pile of dirt. I hope you're happy." He looked around the cellar, at the old stone walls and the sleeping barrels. "I'm going to go build a real empire. Something modern. Something that isn't haunted by ghosts and fairy tales." "I am happy, Cashin," I told him honestly. "And I hope you find what you're looking for." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the sister he thought he knew, the one who was easy to dismiss. He didn't find her. He just saw a stranger who owned the ground he was standing on. He turned without another word and walked out of my life. The heavy door of the cellar swung shut behind him, and the silence that filled the space felt like peace. 2 years have passed since that day. The vineyard is no longer called Solace. I renamed it Cœur de la Terre, in honor of the place where its heart was rediscovered. I didn't follow Cashin's business plan, nor did I turn the estate into a museum. Found my own way. I produce only a very small amount of wine each year, most of it from those 57 magical vines. The story of Antoine Du Bois and the priceless vintage became a legend in the wine world. My waiting list is years long. Each bottle sells for a small fortune, but more importantly, each bottle tells a story. The vineyard is more profitable now than Cashin ever could have imagined, but we measure our success in a different way. In the health of the soil, in the legacy we are preserving. My parents are still in my life. Their journey has been a slow one. They visit, and my father, who once saw only spreadsheets, now helps me prune the vines. He is learning their names. My mother brings me lunch and talks about the weather, not about market trends. Our relationship is quieter now, more careful. It is a bond being rebuilt on a new foundation, one of respect that I commanded, not one of familial obligation. It is not perfect, but it is real. About 6 months ago, a small package arrived for me. It was a bottle of wine from a new, ultra-modern winery in Argentina. The wine was technically brilliant, powerful, and clean. There was no note, just a business card inside the box. It read, Cashin Valois CO. I tasted his wine, and I understood what he had built. It was impressive. It was successful. But it was silent. It had nothing to say. I sent him back a single bottle of my own Cœur de la Terre. Tucked with it was a simple, handwritten note. It said only, I hope you are happy too. I don't know if we will ever truly reconcile, but for the first time I feel like we are no longer at war. We are just on different paths. My grandfather was right. The prize was never the land. It was the journey he sent me on to claim it. He didn't give me a vineyard. He gave me the chance to cultivate my own soul, to find a strength I never knew I had. He taught me that the most valuable things in life are rarely the most profitable, and that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage you can have. Your worth is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. It is forged in the quiet, difficult work of being true to yourself. My story is about wine, but I think the lesson is universal. It's about finding that forgotten, overgrown part of yourself, that cœur de la terre, and having the courage to cultivate it, no matter how many people tell you it's worthless. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I'm so grateful to have this space to share it with all of you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to prove your worth against all odds? I would be honored if you shared your own story of resilience in the comments below. Reading them always gives me so much strength. If my journey resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding our way. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their quiet passion is a strength, not a weakness, maybe share this video with them. Thank you again for being here. I hope my story inspires you to listen to your own heart, and I wish you all the strength and peace in the world.